All right, everyone, we've reached 101, so I think I'm going to go ahead and get things rolling. As I mentioned, we are recording this presentation, so even if folks join a couple minutes in or a little late, they will still get to access all of the great content and resources that are shared. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things off, but please continue introducing yourself and connecting in that chat box. All right, so my name is Kimberly Swartz, and I'm the Senior Manager of Community Engagement here at Taproot Foundation. So really what that means is my job is making sure that each of you has what you need in order to engage in our program successfully. So I'm looking forward to connecting with each of you today and in the days following. So definitely check out my email and LinkedIn info that's listed here on the slide. And then I want to mention that I'm joined by my Taproot colleague, Hannah Vona, who's going to be covering the chat box during today's presentation. So a few logistics notes. All attendees will be muted throughout today's event because there are quite a few of us on the line today, but please don't let that stop you from asking questions or making comments or leaving feedback in that chat box. So use that as your way to communicate with us throughout the event. We will be checking in regularly. And so Hannah will be handling questions throughout the presentation, or will direct them to myself or Larry during some of the Q&A portions that we have set up throughout today's webinar. All right, so with logistics, that groundwork laid, a little bit more about what we do here at Taproot Foundation. We are a nonprofit who drives social change by leading, mobilizing, and engaging professionals in pro bono service. Since the early 2000s, Taproot has partnered with over 8,000 social change organizations and around 24,000 volunteers, totaling $260 million in donated professional services. In addition to Taproot's pro bono programs and our CSR consultancy work, we're also leading up a global pro bono network and are really committed to advancing this movement of volunteerism and fully resourcing charitable organizations across the world through further research, education, and events, such as this one that you joined today. So during today's webinar, we're going to be covering the 5 stages of pro bono project management. So that section will come from Taproot's own resources and knowledge from our 20 years of experience facilitating great pro bono connections. But then the second half of the presentation, I'm so pleased to be joined today by Larry Gansman, who is an experienced project manager and a member of the Project Management Institute of New York City. So he'll be sharing his expertise with all of us on the line by answering questions that you all submitted upon registering for this event, and questions that you may drop in the chat box throughout the event as we go. And we'll absolutely share lots of great tips for successful project management. So thanks so much for Larry for joining, and we're excited to benefit from his expertise. And then we'll save a little bit of time at the end for more general Q&A in case you do have any questions about Project Management Institute or Taproot or pro bono more broadly. Okay, so with all of that said, we have a lot to get through today in a short amount of time. So I'm going to go ahead and dive right in. I believe that many of you on the line today are familiar with Taproot services and the concept of business pro bono. It's professionals donating their skills to causes like yours that benefit society. So Taproot's programs focus on the really broad areas of marketing and communications, HR, IT, business development strategy, finance, operations, and data, and can be accessed through the free online platform that you see here on your screen at taprootplus.org. And I believe my colleague Hannah is going to go ahead and put up a clickable banner right now in case you're interested in exploring that further. So there's no fee for using Taproot Plus or our resources, or pro bono from many other sources as well. Taproot's a nonprofit which really exists to assist other nonprofits. The only cost associated with our programs is the time and energy it takes to request and manage skilled volunteers and manage these projects. And so one of the biggest hurdles that I see nonprofit professionals face when considering working with skilled volunteers for pro bono engagements is the lack of preparedness or the lack of knowledge of the investment that it really takes throughout the project management process, which is completely understandable. Many nonprofits that Taproot works with are completely volunteer run with no budget for bringing in paid consultants or contractors, which means an unfamiliarity with formal project scoping or management. And other nonprofits may be more accustomed to working with traditional hands-on volunteers where you can point to a wall and have them go paint that wall, or point to something in a food bank or a food pantry or kitchen and have them prepare it or have them pass it out. And unfortunately, that's just not the case with pro bono or working with skilled volunteers. Because unfortunately, we can't just point to a computer and ask someone to create our social media strategy for us, although wouldn't that be the dream? But know that you have resources available to you to make this project management process easier. And one of the resources will be the recording of this webinar, which we'll share with all registrants following the event. So I shout that out because I know I saw a few questions pop in already. So yes, confirming we are recording this and we'll share with everyone hopefully later today. So keep an eye out for that email. All right. So with that groundwork laid, I want to dive into the core phases of what a pro bono project looks like and what project management principles you should really have in mind when working with skilled volunteers. So Taproot Foundation has several key principles of pro bono work for both the nonprofit and the pro bono provider. There is one principle, however, that we do refer to as the golden rule of pro bono work, which is treat every pro bono project like you would a paid engagement. And this is crucial for both nonprofits and folks who are donating their time and talents. So nonprofits and the volunteer should really harken back to this principle. And the reason for that is that the impact for the nonprofit is going to be the same. And for the pro bono providers, pro bono projects are projects that are part of your career, right? So a nonprofit is going to get a social media strategy, to go back to that example. But that experience working with that nonprofit, that's a part of your career journey as a volunteer, and it's part of your career journey as the nonprofit professional managing that project. So why not invest in it, invest the time, invest the resources, invest the space you need to give proper feedback, to learn from one another, so that you walk away from the engagement with both the outcome that you need as the nonprofit professional and all of these additional learning experiences and benefits that you could garner along the way as well. And harkening back to this rule also helps ensure the quality of work from both sides of the partnerships. So you're going to get out of the project what you really put into it. And so I'm going to encourage you to keep this rule in mind throughout the whole of today's presentation, as it ties into many different facets of the work. All right, but getting more specific, I want to talk about phase one, which is the kickoff phase. And this is really making sure that everyone involved in the project, involved in the pro bono, is clear about what's going to happen during the engagement. So this is where you're establishing what we call the scope of the project. And so for Taproot Plus projects, these are going to typically be one-on-one or small team projects. And so it's really critical to solidify the scope of the project during this kickoff to make sure everyone involved is really operating with the same expectations and the same end goal in mind. And so when you think about a project scope, it goes beyond the needs statement that maybe you publish to the Taproot Plus marketplace. And it needs to be agreed on by both the volunteer and the nonprofit team. You need to be on the same page, the same team when it comes to working towards the end outcome of what your project is going to entail. And you may want to leave some room for discussions with your volunteer on what the exact outcomes and your goals are going to be. They are a professional, an experienced professional themselves, and they're going to want to be a part of defining the scope and defining the end product. And so nonprofits, I just recommend don't scare someone off by thinking that you've preset every variable in the project and that there's no room for them to provide their own expertise and their own brainstorming abilities in helping create that scope with you. So moving right along, when we think about this kickoff phase, part of what it entails is what we call a kickoff meeting. So this is you've interviewed your volunteer, you've agreed that they have the right stuff, you want to work with them, and then you host a kickoff meeting with them, usually about an hour long, where you solidify this scope, what we were just talking about, and you set expectations. So you're going to make sure that you're agreed on the right work being completed at the right time. So you're going to set timeline and you're going to set goals. You're also going to set expectations for clear communications. So how does your volunteer partner best receive feedback? Do they need a regular email chain? Do they need it verbally on a phone call or through a Zoom call? Do they want to operate in Google Forms and have you track your changes there? Work out all of these logistics right at the front, and so you can set those expectations and start building your trust with your pro bono partner. During this meeting, if you are able to achieve these expectation settings and agree to things like timeline and communications preferences, etc., then it's just going to lead you to be able to have a stronger relationship with that person, which is, of course, going to lead you to be able to create greater impact in the community, because that's what your pro bono project is all going towards, right? Helping build your organization's capacity to do really amazing things. Conversely, if you don't take the time to hold this kickoff meeting where you can kind of really knock out all of these logistics and expectation settings, it could lead to unrealistic expectations on either side, right? Whether the nonprofit or the volunteer, about what a successful project could look like. So confusion about desired outcomes or deliverables, and lack of commitment or buy-in from either side. So kickoff meeting, very, very important, kind of create the bedrock for what your engagement and project is going to look like together. And a little bit more about scoping, because I know we get a lot of questions on this, on the Taproot side of things. A big part of determining the success of your project is going to be setting the scope of it during the kickoff meeting, as we mentioned. And so I do just want to quickly mention that both nonprofits and volunteers have access to a Taproot scope document template under the project resources section in your project page once your engagement is matched. So I fully recommend filling out this document during your kickoff meeting. Use this resource and refer to it as the anchor for your project. So let's talk about what goes into the document. And it's really going to be a list of project deliverables and the activities or specific chunks of work that you're going to accomplish together during the engagement. And where it's possible, you can even get specific on the estimates of the quantity or depth of activity that's going to take place at that step, right? So if you are working on a stakeholder research project as you're preparing for your strategic planning process, maybe you're going to want to define that the volunteer conducts 2 interviews with volunteer stakeholders, 2 interviews with funders, 2 interviews with program participants, and really actually define the number of activities they are going to be doing. And so you can make sure you end the project having the exact number of outcomes or goals that you're looking for. And so a well-defined scope created with the help of your volunteer might end with really specific examples of that you see listed here on the slide, such as the 6 discovery interviews that we just talked through, 2 brochure design options, an HR handbook, etc. And I think you see a good pro bono pro tip here, which is if you find yourself listing more than 5 things you want to walk away from a project with, it's probably more than one project, and you might want to break it out because you might be overwhelming yourself or your pro bono partner and trying to accomplish all of those things in just one project, in one discrete project. So definitely a good tip to keep in mind. Moving right along, just as important as defining things that are in scope, it can be helpful, just as helpful, to define what's going to be out of scope. And this is really beneficial for your volunteer partner to set explicit and clear guidelines around what won't be accomplished as part of this engagement. So an example that I could put here is, if a volunteer has stepped in to create a social media strategy for your organization, the scope of that project could include activities such as defining the cadence of how often you're going to post on social media, what channels you are going to use, what audiences you are trying to reach on those channels, etc. Out of scope activities could include designing the graphics to use on social media, or creating videos that will be used on social media, right? Because those are out of scope of the strategy piece. They are creating a strategy, doing that research and brainstorming with you, but they aren't actually doing the content creation side of things. So this can be really helpful just to make sure that, again, expectations are really, really clearly set in your nonprofit's internal team and for your volunteer partner. And then in the scoping document, you'll also just have some things around logistics, which we chatted about already. So I'm just going to go through this list super quickly. So things like setting a project timeline, agreeing on specifics that must be present in order for the project to be considered, check, completed, setting a regular check-in schedule. I'm going to be curious to hear Larry's thoughts on this later down the road. But Taproot typically recommends just setting up a weekly check-in. And even if you end up not using that time to check in face-to-face or on a video call, use that to check in via email instead. But just having that regular cadence of meetings we found is very, very beneficial for our nonprofit and volunteer community members. And then, of course, the last tip here is around determining communications preferences. Some folks prefer talking on the phone. Some really love video meetings. Some are completely fine just collaborating in a Google Drive folder together or through an email thread. So make sure that you're on the same page about how that communications process will look. And then, as we just mentioned, how are you going to know when this project is complete? You want to make sure you are crystal clear on this. And so definitely recommend breaking this out in your scoping document and agreeing to it, making sure that both parties are very, very, very clear on when we create this, we will be able to walk away from this project knowing it was a success. So the example you see here, the project is complete when the consultant has delivered the selected logo set, when written instruction, and completed a staff training on how to use the logo. So you can see here, it has the item that was delivered, the actual piece of collateral, and steps around what is implementation going to look like of the deliverable. All right, so that was phase 1. I'm going to move forward into phase 2, which is called Discover. And the purpose of this stage is really to make sure your pro bono provider gets to know your organization. You're onboarding them to your goals and the work you're doing. And you're also providing them with the materials they need to do their work successfully. So this is really, it can be called Discover. I've also heard it called like knowledge transfer. So where you're sharing what the volunteer needs to really be effective in their work. And so a few examples I want to share here. We've got a helpful quick list for you of some like background or knowledge transfer items that can be really helpful to have ready, have on hand when you're entering into pro bono. Things like market research or an organizational chart, your prior strategic plan, press kit, marketing plan, a logo or style guide. If you have any data or analytics dashboards, or board meeting minutes, if those are not confidential, those can be really helpful to pass along so your volunteer knows what leadership is really thinking about and prioritizing. And this is a non-exhaustive list, but these hopefully should get your mind moving on things you might want to have ready for this onboarding process, or this discover process, I should say. So I want to move right ahead to analyzing the discovery results. So make sure you build time into your pro bono process to process the initial recommendations and analysis from your volunteer, and look for areas in the background that might be unexplored or not appropriately captured. So during this process, as your volunteer is asking you for information, you may find gaps in the materials you have available to share with them, or the information or brainstorming that you have on hand. And that could be great for you to just take note of and say, all right, this needs future investment, or this could be potentially another pro bono project that we need to enter into. And when your volunteer gives this initial feedback, push them for clarification. If they're saying something to you that you're just not understanding, or you're not really seeing the value of, let them know that, and leave room for conversation and an open flow of feedback during this stage of the process. And then moving right ahead to phase 3, which is called draft. I've also heard it called design in other contexts. But once you've agreed on the discovery, and you've been able to share knowledge and information with your volunteer partner, and you've confirmed the direction of the rest of your project, then this draft or design phase is where the actual creation or development of the deliverable or end product is going to take place. So this is where all the actual work happens, is phase 3. So this is a big one. So I want to share some quick tips on kind of getting you started on this core part of the project. So number 1, if you have any major concerns or objections to the deliverable as your volunteer is working on it during this stage, you need to speak up, right? Your volunteer needs to hear this feedback from you. So this is where a regular cadence of check-ins can be really, really helpful, because you have that weekly touch point to let them know if they're going in a direction that you just don't agree with, or you don't think is as valuable. Number 2, make sure that everyone agrees on how to revise or provide feedback on deliverables. So does your volunteer need feedback directly in a document where you track your changes? Or does the volunteer just need you to leave notes on a PDF, or need you to write a list of suggested edits and passed on through email? So again, coming back to communication and expectation setting and feedback preferences. And then 3rd, remember that the key to this drafting phase lies in providing actionable feedback in a timely manner. So if your volunteer sends you something on a Monday, you need to get back to them as soon as possible, right? They are trying to give back to your organization in a really substantive way, and they need your feedback and thoughts, even if they're negative or positive, right? But they need that information from you in order to continue moving their work forward. So if they get a package of materials to you on a Monday, try and get back to them in the next couple of days so they can continue moving your work along and your project doesn't stall out. And then here are just some tips on giving good feedback and making sure it is actionable. So things like coming in the form of questions rather than solution, addressing things that can be changed, improved, or adapting, and informed by multiple perspectives. So think about pulling in other internal team members, especially if you're giving negative feedback and you want to make sure, hey, am I off base about this? If you need some reassurance, bringing in multiple team members to kind of validate can be really helpful. And then moving into the fourth phase here, which is called deliver. So this is when your volunteer, your pro bono provider submits the deliverable along with any implementation or trainings that are needed for your staff members. So this is where they are going to present it to you. And you're going to have an implementation meeting where you get to answer the question, what's your plan for really taking and using this deliverable? You're going to be letting the volunteer know this is how the great work that you've delivered to us will be effectively used. And depending on your scope of work, it'll be discussing how the volunteer will actually be involved in that implementation journey. And so, sorry, I think I just skipped a slide there, but that's okay. I'm just going to move ahead to a delivery and implementation checklist, which is really what you should be looking for throughout this phase in order to know that your project was successful. So you delivered feedback in a timely manner and agreed upon the final version. You updated all staff members on expected implementation. So you've told everyone, here is this thing, here's how you will be able to start using this thing. That could involve scheduling trainings for key staff or board members. You've updated board members on expected implementation. You've decided if the pro bono provider or volunteer is going to be involved, and you've reviewed any remaining activities and determined their end dates. So at this point, you are deciding, all right, do we feel like this project is successfully wrapped up with a bow? Are we mutually able to agree that our scope of work has been successfully delivered and completed? And if that's the case, then you will move into the last stage, phase 5, evaluation and celebration, which is just as important as any other phase in the process, right? It's often overlooked. But after a nonprofit and volunteer have worked for weeks on a project together, you don't want that to just fade away without the proper recognition, the closure, and the full-on celebration that you both deserve. And so I want to just share a few quick ideas that came from the Taproot team on ways that you can really embrace and celebrate your volunteer as part of this final phase 5 of the pro bono process. So some ideas here: volunteer recognition with a Volunteer of the Month or a Year award, shouting out the volunteer in your newsletter or blog. It gives them something great to share on LinkedIn or add to their portfolio. You could recognize them in a board meeting or staff meeting. You can share swag with them if you have any. Or if they happen to be in the midst of a job search, you could even offer to act as a professional reference for them. So again, this celebration stage, just as important as any other stage in the project management process, even though it's right smack dab at the end, because this is how you can make sure you continue positive relationships with the great volunteers that you've worked with. And then evaluation is also a key part of this final phase. And so just want to quickly run through this. So when we're thinking about evaluating how a project went, how a pro bono project went, you're going to be looking at criteria like, was this project completed and delivered in a timely manner? If you found that your pro bono project went 4 weeks over schedule, this would be a good time to really think and reflect on what went wrong. What caused this to take longer than expected? Did we scope creep? Did we work on things that we didn't actually include in our scope of work initially? Did we not give timely feedback, or did the volunteer not give us timely results or timely deliverables? So pause, reflect. All parties involved should be involved in this evaluation. You could ask your volunteer to share feedback with you in terms of how could we have made your life easier as a volunteer partner, right? So you can take that feedback and then use it to improve future projects that you work on with external consultants or contractors or pro bono volunteers. All right, so that wraps things up for me on the pro bono phases side of things. So I know I've been talking for a long time now, got lots of information out there about pro bono specifically. And at this point, I am so delighted to kind of open up the floor and be joined by Larry, who is, again, a professional project manager and a member of the Project Management Institute of New York City. And so at this point, I'm going to go ahead and stop sharing these slides so you can just see who's talking to you. And Larry, I'd love to just welcome you, give you the floor so you can give folks a quick introduction to yourself, your role, kind of your day-to-day and your work with PMI.
Sure. Yeah. Hi. And thanks, Kimberly. I appreciate the invite and happy to be here. Happy to help. So a little bit about me and who I am and why I'm here. So I work, my primary engagement is actually with Accenture. I don't know if you guys have heard, but Accenture is a very large consulting company, has offices all over the world, has about like 500,000 plus employees also all over the world. My general engagement with Accenture is really more on marketing projects. But my background is actually more technical. I used to be a developer, and I kind of like went into project management back, I think, in 2007 or 2008. And I think around 2009, I started working on media projects and marketing projects. So I just have a little bit of background on that. The funny thing is that I don't really like advertising, but for some reason it drew me in regardless. I have a good friend of mine to blame because he was the one who actually got me introduced into like advertising and media projects. So before that, I mean, I used to work. So my original engagement with project management was with Department of Health of City of New York. I was what was called, I think there we called them like client service managers. So our clients were actually internal agencies and bureaus of the health department. We were helping them with various projects. One of the biggest projects I remember working on was the tuberculosis registry, which was pretty cool. So that was a very interesting project. A very large project too. I mean, New York City does everything large. Yeah. So everything was big. And then, like I said, I've jumped back in 2009, I believe. I jumped into, working on media projects. So that's where I'm at. And that's my professional experience. And I've been part of the Project Management Institute, which is an organization for project management professionals. I'm actually currently working on my PMP. I don't have my PMP yet, but I'm working on that. And I've also been part of PMINYC for, I think, almost about a year now, and a little over a year. And I've been volunteering on various similar engagements like this one. I think this is like my fourth one that I signed up for to volunteer. And I do love to volunteer. I volunteered several years back with an organization called iMentor. I was mentoring a high school student, helping them with like college applications, trying to get into college. Unfortunately, I did not succeed. My mentee did not want to go to college, but he did want to start a professional YouTube career, which I also helped him with because I do know a little bit about that too. So I was helping him,
everyone has different paths.
That's right. Hey, listen, being a YouTube star is a pretty good gig right now. So I'm not gonna knock that down. So that was pretty cool. So I do like to give back to the community, and so this is why I'm here.
Great. Well, we're so appreciative to have you here, and really glad to hear about your strong basis in marketing projects specifically, because I can state from questions that were submitted by folks when they registered for this event, I know there's a lot of interest from people on the line in getting more marketing support and then managing those marketing projects. I know I saw things around web design and social media. So using your expertise from that area will be super helpful for folks. But speaking of questions that were pre-submitted, I want to dive into some of those. And then I know we've been receiving a few in the chat as we've been going. So folks on the line, please continue submitting new questions. We'll start with the pre-submitted ones and then move over to the live ones as we have time. So my first question for you, Larry, is I need to use volunteer support for a big project. People called out examples like web design and fundraising strategies specifically, but they're not sure how to approach it. So where do you suggest starting when you have such a big endeavor?
So you're asking, like, where would you actually look for help, right? That's, is that, okay.
Yeah,
so,
how would you approach kind of breaking down this big endeavor into smaller chunks or more manageable
sorry. Okay,
chunks?
okay, got it. Yeah. So yeah. So yeah, there's a proverb about, like, how do you eat an elephant, right? And the answer is, well, one bite at a time. So in order to get started, if you have like a really large endeavor, and I think you guys actually already talked about this a little bit today, is about trying to figure out what is it that you're trying to accomplish, right? Like what your goals are and what your overall strategy is. But most of the times, for example, if we're talking about, let's say marketing strategy. Like most of the times, marketing strategy could be a very nebulous term. You need to kind of define it, have clear definitions and clear goals in mind. If let's say you want to grow your either Facebook or Twitter audience or Instagram audience, to like 100,000 or something like that. That's a really lofty goal, but you may want to like break that down into steps, depending on where you're at right now, and you want to just kind of like narrow your goals a little bit and narrow your scope, because you guys already spoke about that. If you want to accomplish way too many things, it will require a lot more steps. It will require a much larger team. It will require a lot more time. It may actually even require additional funding that you may or may not have. So that could be, and even getting funding for nonprofit organizations is, could be a separate endeavor in and of itself. So a good thing to do would be to narrow your goals or make them as specific as possible. And and again, there's nothing wrong with having those big grandiose goals or very lofty goals. That's great, and this is something that you also have to keep in mind. But in order to get there, it's a journey, right? It's a journey of like maybe 1,000 steps or 10,000 steps or maybe just 100 steps. And if you can plan out at least for a couple first steps that you want to take, that will help you get there. Because one of the ways to navigate through large projects or large endeavors is to figure out, well, what is the immediate next step that I need to take in order to get somewhere at the very least. Not to get to the end, but to get to somewhere tangible. And that's something that, and again, I'm sorry, I'm talking like really like nebulous right now. I'm not really, but I'm trying to set up like some sort of like a template for how you should make for your like decision-making process. So, just narrow your goal or narrow your step or narrow like your next best action. Right? Like which action do you need to take? Do you need to pick up a phone? Do you need to write an email? Do you need to maybe put a document together? Like something like that. So something like tangible, something that you can figure out exactly what you need to get done. And if you need help with that, then bring in the people that actually can help you put that together. So that's what I would recommend.
No, that was great. And I don't think it was nebulous at all. I think it's by breaking things into small, discrete buckets, you can have victories at each small step along the way. And you also have points of reflection at each step. So you can make sure you're continuing to go in the right direction and continuing to think about what resources do I need to make the next thing happen? Like you were saying, it could be administrative costs. It could be additional staff members. It could be additional volunteers you need to bring in for different pro bono engagements. So no, great advice. Next question we got, this was a popular one. and it's around best practices for time management when project managing. So I'm curious to hear your advice around this one.
Yeah, so time management is like one of those big things that I always kind of run up against. In my current position right now, I have to manage roughly anywhere between 11, 12, sometimes up to 15 active projects. And managing the time between those projects, or managing time between clients as well, between my own internal team, and also obviously all the distractions that you get, the phone calls, the emails, the chats, and everything that, everything around that. So you need to try to prioritize your work. And it's easier said than done because you may have conflicting priorities. And for example, if it becomes easier, the funny thing is it actually becomes easier if you're working for someone as opposed to if someone's working for you. And here's the kicker. The kicker is that if you're working for a client or if you're working for a stakeholder, the stakeholder is probably going to be the one who's going to be dictating priority of the work for you. So if you have specific tasks or specific small projects that you need to take care of, obviously you cannot work on 100 things at the same time. There's no such thing as multitasking. Believe me, I've tried. It's impossible to multitask. So you have to focus on a specific task at hand, right? The question becomes is like, well, what is the right task for you to work at the right time? Okay, so depending on what the task is, that could be your decision. You have to make a decision. Okay, I'm going to work on this instead of that. Decision, by the way, is a very funny word because to decide means to cut off, to actually, it's like you're making a sacrifice. When you're making a decision,
you're cutting off a branch that you could have done
instead. Exactly. That's right. So you're actually making a sacrifice. You're making a decision. So it's like a cost-benefit analysis. I'm not going to get into that, but anyway, but you're making a decision. So whether you do this or you do that. So and what there's something called a priority matrix. It has like 4 quadrants, but I don't want to get into really nitty-gritty of that. But there's things that you can do right now that is urgent and important. Things that are urgent and important, you got to do right away. Just drop everything, do the urgent and important stuff. Something that is important but not urgent is secondary. Something that is not important and not urgent, don't worry about that. I think there's a 4th category, I forget, but there's ways to plan that. It's like a quadrant, like 4 ways to do it. So you can prioritize your tasks if you're, let's say, working for a stakeholder. You can prioritize some minor, smaller tasks on your end to get to the goal that your stakeholder asks you to get to. Mm-hmm. If you and of course you can ask the stakeholder, okay, well, so I have these 2 conflicting projects, or I have these 2 conflicting tasks. Which one's more important, or which one's more urgent? Please help me, right? You can ask someone, and they can help you prioritize. If you are the stakeholder, if this is your program, if this is your project, and you have to make these decisions, then yes, you have to actually sacrifice one thing over another. Remember this maxim as well, is that when everything is a priority, nothing's a priority. So It's basically, it's all the same, because if you have, your customers or clients, or you have your volunteers or anyone all over you just screaming and yelling oh, I need this done, I need that done, and you're the one responsible for making these decisions, then you're gonna have to actually, someone's not going to be happy, and that's okay. It's okay to say no to someone. It's okay to say, no, this is not urgent. This is urgent. If you have to make that call, you make that call. And don't second guess yourself because you're going to get into a loop where you're going to constantly second guess yourself. Don't do it. If you make a decision, just stick to it. Just get it done, get it out of the way, and celebrate, like Kimberly said, celebrate each accomplishment. If you get something done, perfect. Check that off your list. Focus on the next thing. Another good way to prioritize your tasks is to, obviously write them down. There's plenty of different task managers or project management software, free software that you can use. I can even recommend some things that I use. And you can do it that way, and figure things out that way. But the best way to do it is to prioritize. Just
Great. And actually, I'm curious. We might get some suggestions from community members too. If you use any free project management software or even paid project management software that you've been really loving, drop it in the chat, because I'm sure other community members on the line would be super interested in hearing that. I can speak to Taproot uses Asana, and it has been very, very helpful for our team. I see a few people chiming in with Asana as well. So definitely would recommend that personally. And then I want to go back and speak to something you were saying about the need for prioritization. And I would encourage people to, if you've gotten a list of different things that your volunteer needs feedback for, be transparent and upfront with them and say, I only have X amount of time in the next 2 days that I can devote to this project. What would you suggest that I prioritize getting you feedback for first? Lean on your volunteer partner. They are going to be the expert in the area of that your project is taking place in, right? And so lean on their expertise and ask for their help in prioritization for you as well. So don't be scared. Don't be scared of asking that. All right. Another question that we had submitted was around someone who is new to working with volunteers virtually. I think traditionally they had been used to working with hands-on or in-person volunteers. And so they're looking for tips on keeping a project moving forward while working with someone remotely, and also just like maintaining buy-in from that person.
Yeah, that's a great one. I mean, you have to realize the reality is like this pandemic kind of changed everything. It's really tough. So it's funny. I've been asked that question before. Like, how has this pandemic affected me? Like, affected my work, for example. It affected me slightly, but it didn't affect me that much, because the funny thing is, like with Accenture, we actually are used to working remotely. So a lot of the teams, a lot of my teams are actually spread all over the world. I work with teams right now. My client is in Chicago. I have 2 delivery teams that one is in Costa Rica, the other one is in India, in Mumbai. So working remotely is just something that comes naturally to me, but it may not come naturally to everyone. And I can understand that it's a little bit weird, and it's a little bit new, and it's kind of hard to wrap your head around this. One of the things that I would say, like, that makes things easy is, if you're used to working face to face, then I would suggest definitely doing a video conference. So there's a bunch of free video conferences. I think even Zoom has a free option. Google has a free option. Skype is free. There's plenty of like video conferencing software you can use, and video conferences are great because you can actually hold that engagement and hold the attention and actually look at each other eye to eye like you would in real life. And so that's a really engaging way of having conversations and getting the buy-in, right? So you have to kind of build that relationship with with people that work with you. So it's better to actually have that a video conference instead of just a voice conference. So if you have a good internet, if you have a decent computer, that definitely helps. If you cannot have video call, definitely just phone calls or just the audio conferences. That will help as well. I think there was a second part to that question is I think the buy-in, right? You asked about that, and I think it was the buy-in. I guess kind of relies a little bit on you. Is what I mean by that is that it's how involved and how passionate you are about your project or about your task, right? So you want to kind of like relay that passion and relay that enthusiasm to the folks that work with you or to the folks that actually volunteer with you. Because if you're not that enthusiastic, believe me, people who actually volunteer or work with you, they will not be enthusiastic either. So a lot depends on you as well. So if you have the passion for this project or for the program or for the work that you're doing, then the other folks will actually, that passion is infectious, like you will infect them with that passion. And the other thing I would also suggest is that to have a regular cadence of either emails or calls or check-ins, status calls. That's very important, like in my line of work. So I have regular check-ins with my clients. I have regular check-ins with my own team. As a matter of fact, with my own team, I have daily check-ins on all of my projects, because we just need to make sure that things are moving. Because if things gets a little bit stale and you don't communicate often enough, then things will get stale very quickly and things will get off track very quickly. So you want to just keep that engagement going, and not to overdo it, but to just kind of find the right cadence for you, and just speak with your volunteers and ask them what works for them. Because keep in mind that volunteers may be working on other things and they may be busy with their lives and their jobs and etc. So they may have limited time. So it's good to establish that cadence of communication.
Yeah, no, definitely. And what I'm hearing is it's so important to be transparent and communicative with your volunteer right from the beginning, and say, like, I want to make sure that this process is working for both of us. So, like, let's set some expectation. Let's get our preferences out there, and let's figure out a system that can work. So definitely agree with you on that front. All right. I think let's do one more of the pre-submitted questions. And I know we've got a few here in the chat too that I want to save some time for. So I'll do one more of these, the ones that came in from the registration form, which is around advice for keeping clients within the project scope. So this came from a volunteer who is wondering, how can we keep nonprofits like within the boundaries of kind of the work we agreed to up front?
Yeah, this is like the age-old problem. The clients sometimes get excited, or your stakeholders get excited about a project, and they want to do more and more and more and more things while the project is still running. Like it's basically what happens is that the project will never be ending. The definition of a project is that it's something that starts and something that ends. So keep that in mind. A project has to end. If a project does not end, it's no longer a project. It's actually a process. So you're just going through the motions. And if a project doesn't end, you also, the budget for that project doesn't end. Keep that in mind as well. So, and you don't have unlimited budgets, and you don't have unlimited time. So you have a lot of constraints when it comes to projects. You have your time constraint, you have your budget constraint. There's one more constraint, that's scope. It's very important. It's a triangle. If you cut one, you have to cut all else, because everything has to be equal. So your time, your budget, and your scope has to equal to a value, right? It all has to equate. Now, let's say, obviously, for our purposes, like, let's just put budget aside, like there is no budget. Let's say these are all volunteer-run projects. Then it's going to be a time constraint, and it's going to be a scope constraint. So one has to equal another, because if you increase scope, you have to increase time. That's the bottom line. And how do you keep people within scope? Okay, so one of the things to do is to have a scope document. Usually for projects, you have something called a statement of work, or an SOW, which basically defines a scope. You can call it whatever you want. It doesn't matter. You call it a scope doc. That's plain and simple. This is what's in scope. This is what's out of scope, for example. Kimberly, you did a great job covering that too, because just because something is in scope doesn't, you also have to cover something that is also out of scope as well. Set that up. If you want to do it like the way I like to do it sometimes is not just through documents, but through actionable items, through like a checklist or task list, or task list within a project. Like you have just tasks, things you want to accomplish, and this is what's in scope. And you can have, you can set it up in such a way that this is the original scope, and anything that's new has to be here. Like you create like a separate document or a separate list for anything that is new. And if anytime your client, or not a client, but any stakeholder comes back to you and says, oh, hey, I saw that we're doing like this with our website. Hey, can we add like this feature and that feature and then change this one and da da da. All that stuff even changes, by the way. Even like, for example, they say, oh, I noticed that you're working on this little banner on top of our site. How about we actually divide it up into 2 sections and then put pictures here? And then, no, see, like if you're working on a banner, for example, you have like a specific design that you want to accomplish for that banner, right? And if your stakeholder comes back and starts changing up the design, that's it. At that point, it's out of scope. You can actually tell the stakeholder, these are great ideas. Let's write them down, but we need to finish what we started. Because then you can explain, if we don't finish what we started, we want to come back and redesign this banner and rebuild this banner. Now it's going to take longer. How much longer? Well, give me all your requirements, and then we'll figure out how much longer it's going to take. So just you always have to be transparent in and in your communications about scope, and basically stop people in their tracks when they kind of get off rails a little bit. And don't be afraid to say no. Just and especially if you're the one running the project, and someone comes up to you and says, "Hey, I have this great idea. Why don't we do this and why don't we do that?" And say, "No. Why don't you write that down? We'll keep that for later. We'll come back to it once we're done with this." Because again, like your time is precious to you. You also you'll have your due dates to get to, right? You can't just like blow past all of that. Like I said, like a project has to end at some point, so you can't just keep going and going. And explain to your whole project team, especially your volunteers as well, also, and say, this is, and you have to and say, this is our scope, right? You have a document or you have a list or whatever it is, and you say, this is what we're going to try to accomplish, and we're going to try to accomplish it within X number of weeks, X number of days or months or whatever it may be. And once you all agree to that, then that's it. You sign off on it. This is it. You keep that in your back pocket. You always have it available to everyone to see. And if anyone ever comes in and says, I have a great idea, you'll say, great, put your ideas on a different list.
Yeah, point to the signed doc, point to the scope and say, this is not part of it.
Correct.
Great. I think that's super helpful. And I'm going to keep coming back to your phrasing around, is this project versus process? Because I think that's brilliant. I think it's perfect. And I think it resonated with a lot of people on the line. I saw someone even chime in with, this is great. Can we have Larry?
Yeah, I saw that too.
So Larry, I think you had another meeting you need to jump to. So I want to ask you, there were a quick question that came in. And then for folks, if you're able to stay a little bit after 2 p.m. Eastern, I'll answer some of the more Taproot ones. I can hang around a couple extra minutes to answer those. But for now, for the rest of our formal webinar time, want to make the most of Larry's time on the call. So Larry, someone had posed a question around administration or administrative costs. If you could go into a little bit more detail around that. And then someone else was wondering around those tools for project management software that you had mentioned, just being able to share some examples of. Yeah,
so in terms of administrative costs, there's a lot that can go into it. We're talking about, it could be potentially, maybe getting an office, hiring someone, getting equipment, getting software, all sorts of things. Even maybe, like, for example, if you're doing web design, you're talking about buying art or buying fonts. Even that could be, and that could be not really so much administrative, but more like project costs. But it's, I kind of call it, I guess, administrative because you kind of administer the project. But these are all, there could be additional costs to any project, and they can come out of nowhere. And for example, you need a piece of equipment, or you need a piece of software, or you need to hire an additional person to actually help you with something because you cannot find a volunteer for that particular task. So you have to be cognizant that there might be additional costs. I think that's what I meant when I mentioned that. So just keep that in mind for that. What was the next part of that question? Sorry.
No. I asked 2 at once, so that was my fault. Some of those free project management softwares.
Oh, yes. Of course. Okay, so I have 2. So the one that I use personally, it's called Microsoft To Do, and it's just a to-do list. It's very simple. It's a great way to get started. If you already have a Microsoft account, it's very easy to get started on it. It's called Microsoft To Do. Very simple list. The reason why I like it, and I started using it, is because it has reminders, and I live by reminders. So it's either, like my calendar appointments, or my reminders, like just for everyday life stuff. So, and I like reminders at a specific time. Like if I need to call my mom, at like 8 p.m. before she goes to sleep. She's an elderly lady. So I set up a reminder, to call my mom so I don't forget. And it's not because I don't love my mom and I forget to call my mom. No, it's because I do have other stuff in my life that's going on that could interfere with that. So I don't want, I need that. If I need to go, if I need a grocery list, that's also perfect. So it's just for personal stuff. I like Microsoft To Do. For more professional stuff, I like ClickUp. If you guys ever heard of ClickUp, it's it's exactly how it sounds. ClickUp.com. That's correct. Yes, ClickUp. Yes. So ClickUp has a free feature, and it also has extremely robust paid features. And by extremely robust, I mean like they market themselves as like an app that replaces all the apps, and it's true because they have project management, they have document management, they have different like workspaces, so that you can quite literally set up ClickUp any way you want that works for you, and it's extremely powerful and robust. So Asana is another good one. I like Asana too. There's plenty of other ones, but I really like ClickUp. I've used it before in the past. I still use it. We don't so much use it here at Accenture, but because there's only certain things we can use. So, but yeah, ClickUp is really great. I like it.
Okay. Well, fantastic. I just want to say thank you again for joining us. I'm going to go ahead and answer some of the Taproot specific ones. So Larry, if you have to jump, totally understand, but I just want to reiterate how thankful we are that you were able to join us today and for sharing your expertise with everyone on the line. I can speak for myself. I learned some things, and it definitely seems like folks in the chat were definitely very receptive and grateful for hearing your advice.
Awesome. Yeah. And if you guys want to reach out to me, you can reach out through LinkedIn. Let me just hold on a sec. Let me just find
Larry,
my
if you send me your LinkedIn profile information, I'll include that in our follow-up email.
Sure.
Folks.
And and I also registered with Taproot as well. So if you guys want to tap me on Taproot, go ahead. Yeah, I'm registered there too.
Fantastic. Well, thank you so much for your time.
Of course. Happy to be here.
Awesome. All right,
thanks,
folks.
everyone. Bye-bye. Have a good one.
Thanks, Larry. I'm just going to go ahead and answer any of the Taproot specific questions while we still have, I know we're a few minutes over, but if you end up hanging with us, I'm here to answer anything Taproot or kind of pro bono specific. So I know I saw a question come in around phrasing for the social media management project specifically, because I know I called that out earlier in the presentation. So I'm happy to provide a little bit more information about why I did so. So when it comes to social media, that is a huge bucket of potential work for volunteers. And different volunteers, different social media marketing professionals might be skilled in different facets of social media. And so keep that in mind. So hearkening back to something Larry mentioned about being really specific and intentional about what you want to walk away from that project with is going to be important to remember with any social media or marketing project more generally. So if you are posting a volunteer request for someone to create a social media strategy for you, I would highly recommend having some goals kind of in mind about what your organization is even trying to accomplish with social media in the first place, right? So do a little bit of pre-planning so you can clearly tell your volunteer or tell applicants as they're browsing your Taproot Plus volunteer posting on the site to say, we need a social media strategy that drives towards growth on Twitter, or we need a social media strategy that helps us reach our fundraising goals, or we need a social media strategy that helps us get more program participants in our nonprofits community programming. Because all three of those are very different ways to use social media, right? You've got brand awareness, you have fundraising and development, and then you have community engagement. And so it's okay to have a mix of what you're trying to accomplish on social media, but it's good to have some clear expectations for your social media volunteer so that when they deliver the strategy or they deliver campaign ideas for you, they're going to be working towards these clear goals and outcomes you already have in mind for use of your social channels. So that's where my advice and remarks from earlier in the presentation came from. So hopefully that is helpful. But under the social media umbrella, you could think about designing social media graphics, copywriting for social media, creating a whole stockpile of posts that you could use and just plug into your channels. You could do social media analytics, diving into the back end of how successful are different types of posts or different types of content. You could do strategizing, create a social media strategy for a specific fundraiser that you have coming up, for instance. So there's a lot of options there, and I just advise you to be really specific and goal-oriented. All right, the next question here around, what are some tips to making our project sound interesting and attractive to volunteers? So a lot of times volunteers are going to be looking for opportunities to share their skills where they're confident that the nonprofit knows what they need, right? Because it can be confusing and challenging for a volunteer to step into a pro bono engagement, and then it turns out they're the ones figuring it out as they go, right? They're going to want some direction from you in terms of, we want to walk away from the project with XYZ, or we will know that your work with us is successful if you deliver this to us, or if you train our staff on XYZ. So the more specific and goal-oriented you can be when you're posting your volunteer requests on Taproot Plus, the more helpful it's going to be for potential volunteer applicants, because it helps them visualize, okay, I have done this before. I have created a budget for a program before, and I know I can do that work if I spend 5 hours working on this for 3 weeks, and that's doable with my schedule right now. So I'm going to go ahead and apply. So the more real, the more transactional and you can make it for them, the more chance you are of receiving qualified applicants for the job. And then I would also say there's a section on the Taproot Plus application page, or project request page, I should say, where you get to kind of pitch your nonprofit and share what this volunteer's work is going to mean for your organization's mission. So even though this volunteer may be working on creating new HR policies for you to include in your handbook, this is how updating these policies, updating your handbook is impacting your organization and the community that you serve as a whole. Because these volunteers, they're so generous with their time and talents, and they want to know the mission that they're connected to. They want to know what they're ultimately serving and the community challenge that they're helping to solve alongside your team. So make sure you really include that in the project request. And going back to what Larry was mentioning around kickoff and onboarding, that's a really great way to help with buy-in, right? If you include time up front to onboard your volunteer or your consultant partner to your organization and do the knowledge transfer that we were talking about in the discovery phase earlier in the presentation, that is going to help the volunteer understand what's so special about the work that you're doing and why it's so important that they deliver really high quality work to you throughout the course of your project together. All right, so some specific questions. Is it possible to receive coaching on ClickUp? I have seen nonprofits post requests through Taproot Plus for ClickUp specifically, and I believe they were able to find some volunteer applicants. So I would say go for it. And then I also believe I've used ClickUp's user training section before, and they have some really great just free tools in their like knowledge library on their site. So go check that out. But yes, Asana, Trello, things like that, or in ClickUp, you can get volunteer training assistance through Taproot Plus for that. And then another really specific one, are there resources on using or transitioning to Salesforce? So CRM projects. The answer is yes. Taproot Plus has a huge huge community of IT professionals, and Salesforce, also salesforce.org has great community resources around nonprofit training and nonprofit resources. So would recommend posting your IT request on Taproot Plus, but I also huge fan of salesforce.org and would recommend them for resources as well, depending on what you're looking for. All right. I believe that might have been everything. Last call to drop something in the chat if there are any other questions that you'd like me to answer while I'm on the line. All right, I see a few specific ones. I think you're going to be working with the Taproot Plus help desk to answer those. So if you have asked anything specific about your account or a project or session you're currently working on through Taproot, we will follow up with you directly after this presentation. Oh, just my name. I'm Kimberly Swartz. I'm Taproot's Senior Manager of Community Engagement. I said that at the very top of the presentation, but haven't mentioned it the rest of the way, so I apologize for that. Oh, I do see a question around looking for board members through Taproot. So Taproot is a great place for discrete projects. As Larry was saying, projects versus process. Taproot is where you would go for projects. So short-term engagements with an end date in sight. So we're not a great place to find resources. For instance, if you're looking for a new finance chair on your board, we can help you get volunteers to create a board recruitment strategy for you to recruit great finance people to your board, but we are not where to look if you need board candidates. That being said, Pro Bono is a fantastic way to figure out if a certain person would make an excellent board candidate. We have seen countless occasions of where a nonprofit works with a volunteer for a 5-week project, and then they go on to serve on their board for 5 years, because it's such a deep relationship that forms. It really is a partnership. And the volunteer learns so much about you as a nonprofit and your team and falls in love with your mission. And so we've seen volunteers go on to become paid staff members, to become board members, as I said, to continue being longtime volunteers in other facets of that nonprofit's work. And so that's why the celebration phase 5 of the Pro Bono project management process that I talked about earlier is so important, because these Pro Bono relationships that you're forming can be really valuable beyond just the specific project that you complete together. So keep that in mind. Going back to the original question, no, Taproot, not a great place to recruit or like post board listings. However, we can help you with your board in a few other ways. So hopefully that's helpful. All right, I think that was everything. So again, I just want to thank everyone for attending today's webinar, and thanks so much for those who stuck with us, even though we went many minutes over. We just got so many great questions and we wanted to make time for all of them. So I really appreciate you hanging in there with us. And I want to say again how grateful we are to the Project Management Institute of New York City and for Larry's time. We're so grateful for the expertise that he was able to share. And we will include his contact details as well as the recording for this presentation in our follow-up email that we're hoping to get out later today. So stay tuned to your inbox for that. Bryn, I see a chat from you. I'm going to follow up with you directly after this presentation. All right, everyone, hoping to be in touch soon, and I hope everyone has a fantastic holiday season. Bye.